Welcome back to Smitty's Learning Room. Today we move on to the next focus question in Core 2. How can nutrition and recovery strategies affect performance? Today we're going to have a look at nutritional considerations. Now when we have a look at the syllabus, we know that this content's coming under the focus question of how can nutrition and recovery strategies affect performance? We come down to the first dot point and we have a look at nutritional considerations. Now this video will have a look at pre-performance, including carbohydrate loading, during performance and post-performance. And we'll also have a look at how some athletes use their nutrition during, post, and obviously in pre-performance, and how their needs change depending on the length of race or event that they're doing.
So I'd just like to thank you for joining us today, Smitty. Just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about nutrition and what do you know about nutrition in relation to pre-performance and during performance and post-performance. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Smitty. Really looking forward to having a chat to Year 12 students about how they can use nutrition and recovery strategies and how they affect performance. I guess, what do I know about nutrition? Now, obviously with nutrition, there's a few different things that you need to have a look at. So you'll have nutrition that you need to be wary of in relation to training and getting ready for performance, and then obviously nutrition relatively close to the performance that you're going to partake in. Now, obviously, I have this little sort of mantra, it's a bit like looking at a car. If you put unleaded petrol in a diesel car, the car's not going to operate properly. And that's a bit similar to putting really bad foods into our bodies. We're not going to operate properly as an athlete. So if we're living off a diet of fast foods and takeaways, we're not going to have enough natural nutrients in our body to be able to fuel us for performance. So when we look specifically at pre-performance nutrition, we look at concepts around the fact that we need to try and make sure our body's hydrated prior to performance, and also that we have enough glycogen stores in our body to be able to give us enough energy. So concepts of carbo loading, as well as making sure that we've had enough salts in our body so that we don't suffer from things like cramping and that sort of thing. Carbohydrate loading. Now, it's really interesting because I remember going back to Year 12 PDHPE, we learn all about, it's so important to eat lots of carbs before your event and that sort of thing. But now, sort of having a lot more experience as an endurance athlete, I realised that carbohydrate loading is a bit of a process of, ensuring that you're eating carbohydrates prior to performance, but also that you're doing tapering, and I'll talk a little bit about tapering in a minute, but carbohydrate loading is really important prior to performance. So we know that carbohydrates in foods break down in our body to form glycogen stores in our muscles, and obviously those stores of glycogen in our muscles combine with oxygen to create energy for us. So if we've got more glycogen stores, we've got more ATP that can be produced because we've got those carbohydrates in our system to produce the energy. So obviously we want to make sure that we have our supplies stocked up, and a little analogy I use is that the supermarket shelves are full of glycogen because we've eaten lots of carbohydrates, say in a week prior to that big endurance event. If it's, say, an event like a game of soccer or netball or rugby on a Saturday, you might find that you'll start carbohydrate loading maybe 2 to 1 day beforehand. When we do carbohydrate load, we want to have carbs that are obviously free of anything that's processed and low in fat. So for example, it's like pastas, rice, potatoes, bread, cereals, those sorts of things. We can also source them from low-fat milks as well. It's really important to make sure that you're having carbohydrates that are low in fibre. When you look at carbs close to an event, make sure you're having foods that you've had before, that you remember that you've taken before, your body can handle it. You don't want to be eating anything too new close to performance or the big game day, because your body might have difficulty processing those foods and can affect your performance in a negative way. Before I mention this concept of tapering and what is tapering, now obviously for an endurance athlete this is really essential and it's really important for our performance. And not only does tapering allow us to sort of step back off a bit of training for a few days, and depending on the length of the event, so for example an Ironman we sort of taper for a week, if not even more than a week, because it's quite a long duration event, anywhere between 9 to say 17 hours of exercise. So we need to really make sure our muscles and energy supplies are stored for that event. If it was, say, a footy match, you might taper by not doing anything the night before. But the concept of this tapering is not just getting our muscles and everything ready, it's also about allowing our body to build up those glycogen stores, so stack the muscles again, stack the shelves with glycogen, and not do any training so that we don't use those glycogen stores so it's ready to roll for us the next day or the day of competition. Our body is sort of at peak and it's ready to rock and roll. When we talk about pre-performance meals, we talk about meals that can be taken several hours before a performance, or meals that might be taken sort of half an hour before. Now, those ones that are several hours before, the concept of them is to ensure that you obviously meet the needs of your hunger at the time being, so when you first wake up for breakfast, for example, but also if you've got an early morning game, you want to be able to eat enough food that you're going to have enough carbohydrate and glycogen stores for that game in the early morning. Again, you want to make sure you're eating foods that you're used to eating and something that's not anything too different to what you would normally eat prior to a game. If an athlete has, say, a midday game or a game later on in the evening or the afternoon, they might have a pre-game sort of snack, and that might consist of, say, a banana or a sandwich or a sports bar and muesli bar or something, because that's not obviously something that's really heavy that could potentially slow the athlete down and make them feel sluggish, but it's enough to just top up those carbohydrate and glycogen stores for them to be able to perform and have energy to use during performance. So nutrition during performance is usually for events that occur for more than 60 minutes or longer. You obviously will drink some water and some fluids and that sort of thing during events like, say, a soccer game or a netball game, because you need to keep hydrated. But usually when we talk about fueling and nutrition in relation to foods, that's for events more than an hour. So, for example, some of the events that I do, range from an hour and a half all the way through to 14 hours. So I need to make sure that I'm having foods that are storing my body with carbohydrates and glycogen supplies, that are replenishing salts and minerals in my body, that's hydrating me, that's not going to upset my stomach. If they're longer events, I'm going to have to look at things that are tasteful, that taste nice. So in relation to during performance and having a look at fluid replacement, a couple of days prior to a race, you'll sort of see me walking around school with the drink bottle, and I'm constantly trying to keep my body hydrated. When the body's under stress, we tend to sort of dehydrate our body a little bit, so it's really important to make sure that we maintain hydrating our body prior to that, whether that be in a few days leading up to race day or the day before game day. So 24 hours before, you want to make sure that you're consuming water, sort of sipping on it all day long to ensure that your body's hydrated. When it comes to race day, before performance, usually within the half an hour beforehand, I try to sort of drink between sort of 200 to 500 mils of water, just so that sort of last minute hydration, and it sort of helps me calm my nerves a little bit, interestingly. And then during performance, I sort of generally tend to have about 200 to 300 mils sort of between every sort of 15, 20 minutes. And then the same, like when I finish performance, it's really important to refuel with water again. Sometimes if I'm really, really dehydrated or I've been going for quite some time, a few hours, I'll replace some of that water with electrolyte. So for example, if I'm out riding my bike for more than 2 hours, I generally have a rule of thumb that I will take a bottle of electrolytes with me, which helps me refuel my salts and minerals that have been lost through sweat. And sometimes also post-performance, I will drink some electrolyte-based sports drinks to try and restore my body, which also allows my body to recover a lot quicker. So something that comes up quite often is the use of sports drinks for sport, and are they actually effective, or are they just full of sugar and that sort of thing? I generally tend to find that, as a rule of thumb, I only use electrolytes when I'm doing activity or training for more than an hour, and that's because my body doesn't need to refuel those stores if it's less than an hour. I don't like to use drinks like Gatorade, Powerade, those sort of commercialised products. Nothing against them, they just find that I like to use sport-specific sports drinks, which have sort of more salts and amino acids. Some of them actually have some carbohydrates in them, so if you are doing endurance events, that's a way to replenish your carbohydrate stores through a really good quality electrolyte drink, as opposed to eating food. When we talk about these endurance events, we talk about the fact that we're not just replenishing our stores of water, we need to replenish our carbohydrate stores, and ways to do that is through energy bars, gels, bananas, and obviously these sort of electrolyte drinks which have carbohydrates in them. So for example, if I'm doing a half Ironman triathlon or an Ironman, we can consume up to something like sort of 17 plus little gels on the bike leg or the run leg combined, and they're full of carbohydrates that our body keeps using because we can't eat big meals throughout the day because our body can't perform and convert those quick enough. So we get our nutrition from smaller products such as energy gels and bars and electrolytes. When we talk about post-performance, hydration and refueling is really, really important. Most of the times we find with triathlons in endurance events, we have like a recovery tent, and in those recovery tents we have foods and drinks which will help replenish those glycogen stores so that our body can start or continue to sort of keep functioning effectively. It's really important that you consume food like as soon as you can, preferably within the first half hour, to help your body restore those glycogen supplies and also sort of kickstart the growth and repair of muscle fibres. So if you can try and get some carbohydrates and proteins, that's why you often see people drinking a protein shake after performance to try and kickstart that recovery process. It's really important to hydrate during this process as well so that you rehydrate your body to aid in recovery. If you finish an event or a game and you're not eating straight after it or hydrating straight after it, it's going to take a lot longer for your body to recover, and it could also lead to injuries and illnesses because you're trying to push your body beyond constraints if you're not recovering properly.
I hope you enjoyed the interview with Smitty about nutrition for pre, during and post-performance. Keep an eye out over the following weeks to see some more interviews based around supplementation and recovery strategies.